I am back with a new build. So this one will be for the Warlock healer. So let's just jump right into it. So I have two loadouts. One is for healing over time and one is for shielding. The only difference between the two is this last feat, but everything else is literally exactly the same. This is like it's more buff debuff centric, but it's also focusing on personal stuff a little bit. I dropped a few buff debuff related things in order to get that in order to get the stats a little bit higher, but it's still mostly buffs and debuffs. So as you can see, I'm a drow race, and so we'll just start with the gear. So starting with the helmet, this is 5% outgoing healing and power after 50 seconds. I don't really like it stacking that long. I prefer it to be like less than 25-30 seconds, but you're a healer, so you shouldn't die very often and have to restack it, and also you don't really have to, you don't want to have to do really high damage or whatever like a DPS and have your stats up, so it's not that big a deal. So this one drops from the second boss in, I think it's the second boss in Master Lair of the Mad Dragon. And then the chest plate, I'm still using this debuff one. This is still the best one by far. It's for Warlock and Bard. This one you can buy from the little shop here, Demon Web Pits. You buy the first version of it in the previous campaign, and then you upgrade it in Demon Web Pits. So you buy it in Menzo Brands and then upgrade it in Demon Web. And you want to stand basically on top of the boss because it only has a 10-foot radius. Just make sure you don't stand in the KV for like the first artifact call if there's a fighter tank in there. That's the most important thing, but if it's not a fighter tank, then you can just stand on top of the boss and be good. Because it's a very close range. Like 10 feet is probably, well, I can show real quick. If we look at the target, 10 feet is, it's about like that far. I think that's the distance from where I'm standing to his little circle, and you can see the debuff pops up there. So that's how close you have to be to the target's, hitbox basically. So it is very close, much closer than you expect it to be, because that's definitely not 10 feet. That's like 3 feet in real life probably. And then these arms come from the new dungeon. They come from the first boss, or the last chest, I suppose. Just maximum divinity increase, or soul weave, I suppose. I'm still using these weapons. These give 6% overall outgoing healing, or 12% in wild space. You could also swap over to like the void touched ones from MIC, or you could still use Mastercraft if you want. Unless they come out with a new Mastercraft and it doesn't cost 3 million for the set, I'm just going to stick with personal weapons for my support, because it's not really worth it, and as a DPS player I don't really care that much about 2% extra damage or mitigation, so I'm not worried about it. The boots also come from the new dungeon. These come from the first boss and the last chest. They currently stack on each heal that you do, so it's basically instant to get 5 stacks. I'm not sure if they stack multiple times on a heal, like if you heal 5 people with one ability in, one tick, if it instantly gives you 5 stacks or not, but either or, it's still going to be 100% uptime on that 25% soul weave regeneration, so it's still best in slot by far. And now for the neck and waist, I'm using the Marilith set. This is basically just the upgraded Apocalypse. You're pretty much always going to be 5 stacks with it, because you're going to target 90 crit strike on a healer. And it just gives that 5% extra damage to the target. Obviously, if you want to go personal, you can go for the Detector set. I'm not going to equip these, but they give 7% overall outgoing healing and 7% forte when you use encounters, which Might not be all the way up to 7, but you know, you might average like 3 or 4 probably on a healer, depending on um, possibly more, because I think they last 10 seconds and they refresh. Um, so that's the neck and waist, and then I am using this ring. It's kind of a scrubby ring, but it gives 11,000 outgoing healing rating, so that's how I'm able to cap my outgoing healing rating. You could also switch this over to, if you want, the Grace Ring. That is a 3.5% defense awareness debuff on the target. A lot of targets have, a lot of bosses have mobs in them now, so getting this to proc, especially in the new dungeon, is not feasible. So unless I'm doing like a speed run, or maybe if I'm doing like Tom or something, I don't really worry about using this anymore. I just use personal stuff. And then you could also use this Opal Loop. This is probably overall better healing. You lose like 6,000 outgoing healing rating, but you get 7% overall outgoing healing. So I don't know. It's tough to say which one's better. I just like to see the better stats, to be honest. So that's just why I use this. And on a healer, once you're over like 80%, it really doesn't matter how much more you get. It's more of a personal choice than anything. But between these 3 rings, that's pretty much what I would use. My other ring, I'm using the 5% outgoing healing ring. This one comes from the Advanced or Master Moon Dancer trial. That's it. And then for my shirt, I am using the 7.5% outgoing healing shirt. This one comes from Moon Dancer as well. So both of those stacking together gives me 12.5% when I have a full group. And then I am using the new pants. These ones, this is a bit of a convoluted thing, but basically I use the advanced pants, these ones, because they give 2,000 critical strike and 1,000 critical severity, and they have the exact same bonus as the master ones, except the master ones, they have, you can either get 1,000 crit severity, which is the best version, and 1,500 combat advantage, and then accuracy and combat advantage are the only ones on those. So basically you gain like an extra 2,000 ratings if you use these, and you lose like, I think it's 250 item level. Yeah, 250 item level for 2,000 less ratings. I don't think it's worth it. So that's the reason why these are basically the best ones to use, and not the master versions. I don't know why Cryptic decides to add such terrible rating stat distribution, but that's what we're stuck with. So, and then for our artifacts, I'm just using for stats. So obviously I use this for the set bonus. Terrible stats on it like usual. And then for the other ones, I'm using the Blast Scepter you usually want to have on your healer, and it's actually pretty good statted, because this gives the most debuff in the game, next to the Mythalar, in the demo if you want to count that. And then the other two are the two, so I just have the music box, that's what I use on my DPS, so I can just swap it back and forth. And then I use this Staff of Flowers. Both of these come from the same like Battle Pass pack or whatever, I think it was one from last mod. So I just use these for ratings because they're high item level. There's not really any other artifacts that give good healer-ish ratings. So now we'll just go over boons. So for boons, I go for, of course, all power and then critical severity, critical strike for those. And then I get all hit points, and then I get all movement speed. And then I get forte outgoing healing, and then if you have extra points, you can go for action point gain. And then I definitely go for Blessed, Advantage, and Resilience. This one's just a little bit extra buff for yourself, like survivability buff. And then if you have extra points, you can go for this one as well, just for a little bit extra self-preservation, I guess. And then I'm just starting to put some points into damage resistance versus Fiends, because Fiends is one of the most common enemy types in the game, so that'll just help survivability a little bit too. And then you could go for defense and awareness if you have the points. I wouldn't worry about recharge speed because you don't really use recharge speed on a healer since you have no cooldowns for most of your abilities. And then we're using Guild Stronghold, Power Boon, Defense Boon. I usually just keep on movement speed because like I said, I don't really ever die on my healer especially. So I usually just keep this on, but you could also switch it to Revive Sickness for boss fights if you want to. Companions, summoned, I'm using Portobello right now, but of course you can use Flapjack, Drist, Tutor, Spine Devil, or Scorpion if no DPS has it. These are basically the best 6 boss fight companions to use. And these 4, minus the Spine Devil, are basically the best ones to use like throughout the dungeon as support companions. And then equipment, I am using the Forte outgoing healing stuff from Mount Hote now. Of course I have this combat enchantment. I'm using dulled senses. Of course if you want to go more selfish you can use reinvigorate, and reinvigorate caps out my outgoing healing to 120% for this build, so technically yeah, but I just keep on dulled senses. You could also use armor break if your tank's not using it, either or. Those are basically the best 2 like debuff combat and companion enhancements, so that's why we use those. And then for companion bonuses, I'm using, of course, the Raptor, and then the other 4 I'm using the Golden Bullet Pup, the Compy, the Proud Pink Yeti, because it's the only other outgoing healing one, so I don't really know what I would replace this with. Maybe an extra power one, like, I don't remember what the other power ones are. And I cannot find them easily because I have so many companions. Well, I would just switch it out for another power one if you don't have. Yeah, I can't find one. But the last one I'm using is the Wolf. I just bought the Zen pack. That's basically the easiest way to get it. This thing still is the only companion that gives full crit severity, just crit severity by itself. You could also use something that gives crit severity and power if you want. I think there might be a companion that gives that. I'm not really sure. I'd have to look. Or critical strike power if you want, if you need the crit strike. But the Wolf is absorbently expensive. Let me see if I can find one. There's epic ones, well, 4 mil as you can see, but I don't think there are any blue or green ones. Let me just check. I mean, there's 400 mounts in this category, so, or companions. So even if there is a green one, I don't think I'd be able to find it. So yeah, I just ended up buying the pack in here, which I don't think, yeah, I won't be able to see it anymore, but I bought it during the Winter Festival when it was 30% off, so it was 3,500 Zen. I think it's normally close to like 5,000 Zen for that pack. And I literally bought it just for the Wolf, because getting the Wolf otherwise is incredibly rare. So that's what I'm using there. Mounts, I'm using Mystic Aura. Usually I like to have the healer on Mystic Aura and the tank on Runic Aura just to keep it consistent. A lot of groups switch it up and change and use pack tactics or use the tank on Mystic or whatever, and I don't know, I don't really like doing stuff like that. I just like to make it consistent across the board, at least for the groups that I run. Mount doesn't, there's a lot of different things you can use. Swarm, Eline, T-Rex, all the 15% debuffs. And then my stable, I'm very simple. I'm using all brutalities for these. So I'm using Guardian Spirit, I'm using 2 Trainers Restoration. The Guardian Spirit is for that extra survivability again. And then I'm using 2 Minder's Covenants. Warlock dailies are very situational, so you're probably not going to use them very often. So even though you have to have full AP, you're probably going to have full AP like 90 or 95% of the time, if not more. So that works out. Of course, we're using Outgoing Healing Collar, and then Crit Severity Collar, and then the other 3 don't really matter. Obviously, probably want to get movement speed for this one, but the other two don't matter, at least for healer. And now I will go over my enchantments because I glossed over them. So enchantments, I'm just using, you know, for stat balancing purposes. I'm using this one. I upgraded it just because I made it on my character builder build, so I figured I would use the same thing. And then I'm using Forte here. Of course, you could also use Outgoing Healing if you need the rating. Outgoing Healing is Jade's, but I don't need the rating, believe it or not, so I just use Forte here. And let me switch one of these over to defense too. And then for these two, I'm using Devil's Precision for the 5% crit strike, and then the maximum hit points for this one. And then we're using Lightning Flash. You could use the Divine Aegis because it's like super bugged right now, and it also gives that overall outgoing healing. But I don't know. I just keep using Lightning Flash. I don't really like the bug with Divine Aegis because it makes people complacent, and then they just don't do any mechanics because they always have a big shield because of the bug. So I just prefer not to use it personally. So I just keep on the Lightning Flash. Of course, movement speed, we could also use AP gain or action bonus or whatever. I just always use movement speed because, like I said, your AP is not needed very often. And then, of course, for these two, we're using dexterity and wisdom. Now I will go over my powers. So for powers, your main outwell you want to use is Eldritch Blast. This will do an AoE attack, so it will always proc set bonuses that require you to hit a single target with AoE, like the Grace Ring I mentioned earlier, or if you're using the Vistani set, which I don't think I have on this character, but... And then I also just have Infernal Sanction on. This will raise a barrier on the person that you target with it. And it's good for certain like tank buster type mechanics for the tank if there's not a pally heal that's there if you're like doing a trial. But in dungeons like Dim and Web Pits is good for the hypo or for the ball and the second boss as well from Gromp. For our encounters, I'm using Vampiric and Revitalize. Both of these have heal over times on them, and you don't have to put down like a static circle or anything. And they also last 12 seconds. So the way Revitalize works, it also cleanses on top of its healing. So it heals 850 magnitude when there's one target. If there's two targets, presumably it heals for 425, and then it just decreases more and more after that. The heal over time, on the other hand, does not decrease with the maximum number of targets. It's always a static 200 heal magnitude. And then this one does not decrease with the maximum targets. This one requires you to target an enemy with it, which means you cannot use it just by itself. As you can see, you must have a target. So that's one downside with this, but it's by far the best heal over time for the Warlock. And then the third ability, you can either use Warlock's Bargain. This will give you some Soul Weave back. I think it gives about maybe 10% Soul Weave or so. Or you can use Pillar of Power for the extra 5% outgoing damage that it provides for 10 seconds. This one is really only good for certain boss fights where everybody just stands in the same spot the whole time. Because it's such a small circle, and obviously people have to stand in it to get the buff for it, and most people don't stand in stuff like that, so I don't really use it very often. I just keep on Warlock's Bargain if I need it, if I really need to heal a lot. The two dailies I use, the main one is Soul Barrier. This is mostly for like heal check sort of stuff. This will give 10% damage mitigation to the players. It lasts for 12 seconds, and it does that 250 heal over time. So you can stack this 250 heal over time. It also does an Infernal Barrier on top of everybody every time it heals. And that barrier, if the thing runs out, then it's still, the barrier lasts for 20 seconds if it doesn't get taken off. So you can stack the 250 heal magnitude with the 250 with this, and have 3 heal over times proccing at the same time, which is quite strong. So it's actually very easy to heal checks, like in Demon Web Pits. Soul Pact I have very situational. It does so you use it and it doesn't do anything until, actually I think I'm using the wrong one. No, that's the right one. So you take damage over time and it will heal everybody else when you take damage. It also increases damage resistance by 10%. So the only times that I really use this is during like the poison phase when Lolth does the poison at the last boss, because a lot of people don't get out of it for like 15 seconds for some reason, or they just die. And I also use it in the like shortcut part on the second boss of MDS, just for a little bit extra survivability. But the main one I use is Soul Barrier, but like I said, both of these dailies aren't really used very often. They're very situational, since they're, you know, your raw healing with your other stuff is so strong. And then for the other stuff, I use this one for the 10% movement speed and a little bit of crit strike. And then I always have Soul Bond on. This will heal whenever targets are below 50% health. But if I'm in a trial, I switch this Shadow Walk over to this one, because you can't use this in a dungeon because there's no other player that's going to be healing you. And this will just give you extra passive Soul Reave, because, I mean, this one by itself is really not very good. It gives 2.5% crit strike. Big deal. So this is actually a pretty strong Soul Weave regeneration. And then for our feats, we're using just basically Soul Weave regeneration, a little bit of like passive healing, so down, 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 and then up. So this last feat is the one that does the heal over time on all of our abilities, as you can tell. And then for our other shields loadout, not at a campfire, for our shields loadout we have everything is the same, except I'm just using the last down feat instead. Now I will just show my stats real quick. So I'm not buffed up right now, but the buffs that I use the Forger's Box, and then I use Flask of Potency. I use this little cheap outgoing healing food. You can buy it from the from Port Nyanzaru. A full stack is like 60k AD or something like that, and it's basically like the basic version of guild food. So I use that to cap out my outgoing healing, and then I use Squash Soup and Wildstorm, of course. If we look at our stats, so my power, outgoing healing rating is capped, like I said. Our power is, it's about like less than 1% under cap with Runic Aura, because that gives 2.25%. So it's like 200, 300 rating away, I think. And then my crit strike and crit severity are just a little bit off. Well, crit severity is like 9% off, but crit strike is less than 2% off. So, but if we look at our, I'll just do a quick stat add up for everybody. So outgoing healing, I'll just start with that. It's 94.3%. So I get 5% from the helmet, which puts me up to 99% outgoing healing. And then I get, well, I technically get, I think, 6% for this, because I already have one stack of it, plus 4% of this, so that gets me 10% outgoing healing, so I stand at 109% outgoing healing, roughly. And like I said, you could also use Reinvigorate, and that would put you to 118% outgoing healing. And I think that's as high as I can get. I don't think I can get any higher unless I swap some gear or something like that. And then for power, I get the 2% from Runic Aura, so that puts me to 80%. I get 18% from Raptors if they're all Celestial, so that puts me up to like 98%. And then I get 5% from the helmet, plus another 6% from the Master Boon. This one. So that is 11% more, so that puts me up to like 109% power, and I think that's as high as it procs to. And then my other stats, crit strike just goes up by like a flat 10 to 11%, so that gets up to about 87%. I think that's where it stands. Of course, if I drop this this thing, I go back down to like 85%. Which obviously, if you really wanted to, you could use a wood elf instead of a drow, and you could get you could cap that out to 90. And then crit severity stands at 109%, but I get 9% from the pants, so that puts me up to 118%. And I think that's all I get. So basically all my stats are, 5 to 10% under. Power and outgoing healing both about 110%. Crit severity is almost like nearly 120, and crit strike is about 2 or 3% under with the feat that I'm using right now, or the class feature. You also, if you have, actually, no, never mind. So that's basically where my stats and build and everything stands. Of course, like I said, the healers are very liquid, so you can switch out stuff at will. The main pieces of gear that I would definitely use: this chest plate, these arms, these boots, these pants, this shirt, all of these artifacts. The neck and waist set probably, unless you have someone else who's using it, then you can use like Vistani. These rings you could potentially switch out if you want, and same with the helmet. This combat enchantment probably. You could also switch off a Devil's Precision if you don't want to waste them, because I mean they're kind of expensive and you don't really want to use stuff like that on a healer. Same with Squash Soup, it's kind of expensive to use on a healer. But I'm just using it for the build showcase basically. And I think that's basically everything, so I hope this helped with any potential Warlock healer builders out there. And basically, if I were to build a Bard healer, it would literally use the exact same gear and everything, so this could be used for Bard as well. Except Bard actually gets 10% critical severity for free, which the Warlock doesn't get, but they also don't get as much crit strike because the forte differences. But yeah, so I hope this helped, and thanks for watching. And I might make a Bard DPS build here soon. So, bye.